After corruption.
I'm currently working on a survival game called After Corruption. It's a survival horror game themed like a PlayStation 1 title. This is the second devlog. It's going to focus on character design choices, inventory management, and some combat. When designing in 2D and 3D, there are different options for how you can animate characters. You can have pre-built flat sprites. You can rig your characters, meaning they have a basic skeleton with a mesh attached to it. And you can have programmatic animations. Pre-building sprites give you the most direct control but take about the most amount of time, and you don't genuinely end up with a lot of flexibility in the end other than what you pre-design. Rigging is relatively quick to set up, but you can need to tweak it and configure it to fit certain situations or certain models. Programmatic animations can take a long time to set up and to get right, but you can have a lot of individual control without really worrying about affecting all of your animations. Note that rigging in 2D is technically the same as rigging in 3D, but most animation sets are based on 3D humanoid data, so any pure 2D sets will be unique and won't really be compatible with normal humanoid animation libraries like Mixamo. I don't have any examples of programmatic animation, but there's a good GDC talk by Wolfire Games about how they use programmatic 3D animation in their game Overgrowth. I'll put the link in the description. My last game I worked on was a 2D pixel art game, and it required that I hand make all the characters. So there were 7 characters and each had 10 unique sprites, so that's a total of 70 sprites for characters in the game. And adding any additional animation ended up multiplying that work out. So moving to 3D, I wanted to take use of 3D rigging. Now that I'm going to do 3D rigging, I had to make a decision on what kind of enemy types I wanted. So I could either have humanoid or I could have non-humanoid rigging types. A humanoid rig would allow me to reuse pre-existing assets, and from a design standpoint, humanoids are easy to visually understand for the player. Non-humanoid rigs would have the same problem as 2D rigs and require that I make my own animations and skeletons, essentially. I debated with myself on what path I wanted to take from a technical and a story standpoint. I didn't want to use normal humanoid people or like zombies, but I found that non-humanoid enemies were just going to cause a bunch of work, and it wasn't really worth the time. So I decided to use kind of zombie adjacent enemies and have humanoid infected enemies with these kind of tentacles growing out of them. I made and animated the tentacles separately from the main bodies so I could move them around and keep a base humanoid model that I wouldn't have to alter. Humanoid. I did end up making one standard enemy that would be non-humanoid, but the majority of enemies would rely on basic humanoid actions. So then I created a base texture for the enemies and player models, and I created separate layers for clothing versus their underlying skin layer. So I could load the clothing as templates and then flatten them down on top of the skin and make unique single textures that I could apply to any of the basic models. I add a lot to the inventory screen, both visually and functionally. You can equip weapons. You can have move items, which you can use to align gun mods. You can combine items like putting 2 small medkits together for a medium one. You can look at item info and you can drop items. Dropping items is something that I debated with myself. I originally wanted to use an item box mechanic, but because each of the maps would only allow a single safe room, that would require the player to come back to like the same room every time they wanted to do inventory management, and I really didn't want to do that. It just seemed like a really bad idea. So I decided that player could drop items. I thought about the idea of the player destroying items, but I preferred the idea of dropping items just because the maps would be temporary anyway, so once they left the map they would lose it, so it would be the same thing as destroying it. The only other time that I can think about this really being used is in Resident Evil 0, and that was a little bit divisive, so hopefully it'll work in this situation. Lastly, I'm tweaking some small animation stuff, like head tracking when the player is near an enemy or item, and it looks like this. The Steam page for After Corruption is up, so please check it out, and wishlist if you want updates. Thanks for watching.